Good evening, and welcome to the American Family Association's weekly cable program. The AFA is a national organization devoted to strengthening the American family, the very foundation of our civilization. Tonight's topic is, why are black poverty and unemployment rates so high? And our host is Conal Friel.
At a recent congressional hearing with Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke, Congressman Green of Texas asked Bernanke, "Can you tell me why unemployment rates and poverty rates are more than twice those of white Americans?" Bernanke indicated this was not his area of expertise, but the question is a good one. The black poverty rate is 25% versus 10% for whites. Black unemployment is 8.5% versus 4% for whites. Tonight's program asks the same question. Why? And also, we'd like to know what can be done to address this problem. Our guests are Alvin Besant and Bill Andrews. Alvin Besant is a member of Newsday's editorial board. He covers national domestic issues such as taxes, homeland security, education, campaign finance, and Medicare. Since 9/11, he's written extensively on civil liberties and the proper limits of presidential power in wartime. Besant joined the editorial board 13 years ago, after 7 years as a reporter. He has a bachelor's degree in psychology from Michigan State University, a master's in journalism from Columbia University, and completed a fellowship at Stanford University in international relations. He worked as a college advisor and legislative aide to Michigan Governor Milkinson before embarking on a journalism career. Bill Andrews is the chairman of the board of Consumer Action Program of Bedford-Stuyvesant, an economic development corp, which is the second largest employer in Brooklyn. By profession, Bill is a financial advisor who lives and works in Bedford-Stuyvesant and is a father of 4 children, all of whom graduated New York City public schools. 2 of his children have college degrees, and 2 are now in college. Bill has been a strong parent advocate for more than 20 years and has advised the New York City's chancellor and the Board of Education for over 10 years. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
My co-host tonight is Frank Russo. Frank, you have a question?
Thank you, Conal. Yes, and thank you both for taking the time and your busy schedules to come. We appreciate it. Let me begin with Congressman Al Green from Texas. Question to Ben Bernanke. Why do you think, I'll begin with you, Alvin, why do you think black poverty rates at 25% are so high compared to the 10% rate for whites?
Why don't you start with a tough question? That's such a big question. It's almost impossible to get your arms around. But you have to start historically, I think, when you address it. I mean, when people talk about poverty in this country, very often they talk about income, but wealth is the more important factor there. And in terms of building wealth, it's a multi-generational endeavor. And it begins, the bedrock of it is home ownership or owning property in this country. Obviously owning businesses and the like also play into that. But you have to realize that for a long part of the history of black people in America, we were precluded from owning property. We were precluded from owning houses. I mean, and it's not so distant past. I mean, if you think back to Long Island's fairly recent history, when Levittown was developed, there were deed restrictions that expressly said that you couldn't sell those houses to blacks. I mean, when you start with that kind of deficit, after a history where your labor was not compensated at all, then you start way behind the line in trying to accumulate wealth. Obviously, that's the historical picture. As we come forward, all of those things play out, and while black wealth is increasing in the black community, there's a lot of ground to make up.
And Bill?
Well, I just want to pick up on that, and living and working in Bed-Stuy for over 35 years and experiencing those problems, I put it in basically 2 major categories. 1, lack of connections. 2, lack of education. And if you deal on the lack of connections, I'm talking about blacks having access to the unions and starting out with unskilled jobs in the construction industry, working with the trash and the sanitation and so forth. Because one of the things I observed was that you had people of the same educational level, maybe they even had backgrounds in prisons or so forth, but in the white community where they had connections, these same young men, and we're talking about males, they were able to get jobs and pull themselves up and get homes and so forth, where blacks, they don't have those connections. there's been progress being made, but they don't have the connections to pull themselves up and get those jobs. So as a result, they don't have money and they go into other things. On the educational side of the ledger, you have where the school system has failed in New York City. It's much, much better now under Mayor Bloomberg, but in the 60s and 70s, when they started with the decentralizations, the schools were not really addressing the problems of what it would take in the 21st centuries to get this young generation motivated so they would learn and get the necessary educational skills to get the better jobs. I don't want to talk too much, but one of the things that I've also observed in Bed-Stuy and so forth in the inner city, other groups can come in, primarily, let's say Asians and so forth, people from the Caribbean area where they're motivated, they can come into the system. They know whether the general school system is working properly or not. They will take skill training, get the necessary skills, and they can get those jobs. Whereas blacks I'm talking about that migrated up from the South or so forth, the school system doesn't save enough of them. There'll always be some that get through, but the majority are still floundering around.
Now, let me ask you another question related to this. And I'm going to take it up on Alvin's point about the history and no property and so forth, because I'm thinking my grandparents emigrated here from Italy, and they owned nothing. They never owned anything, never even went to school. I mean, they worked as laborers in some fashion. My father never finished high school. So I understand what you're saying, but yet we see change occur. Now, what I want to focus on, neither of you mentioned this, and it's a delicate area, but I think it's important, and I want to do this in a charitable way, to try and get information that we think will help solve the problem. That's the objective, solve the problem. Recent data, and what I'm saying by recent compared to the 1960s, we look back 1960s, 25% of black children were born with no father at home. Remember, Senator Moynihan made a big thing about it. Now the white rate of illegitimacy, if you use that term, children born with no father, the white rate has reached 25% when Moynihan went into a tizzy over the black illegitimacy rate. But today, last year, 2006, 70% of black children were born with no father at home. Now, what I wanted to ask you is, in light of the impact that has on these poor children, to what degree do you think that's a contributing factor to the poverty rate?
It, of course, contributes to the poverty rate. If you've got two people in a household who are working together and striving together, obviously you can do better economically than a person by themselves, particularly a woman by herself, because there are obviously income problems, income disparities with regard to women in the workforce. Not to mention just the crushing load of responsibility. And there are only 24 hours in a day. A person trying to do it all by themselves can't devote as much time to career and work as someone with help. But there are a lot of impromptu families in the community, not just the black community, but in American society in general. I mean, if the biological father's not there very often, there is someone there is a male figure that's a part of a family. It's distressing to me, but increasingly I see in younger generations that people will be together for decades and just simply not get married. Now, does that count as a father not being there? I'm not sure how the statisticians would look at that, but I know a number of families where that's the situation, where the man and the woman never marry, but they are a stable family.
Well, I have a little bit of different twist on that. What I've observed over the years is our government really hasn't addressed that problem. The welfare system that we have today, especially in New York City, it encourages the male not to be there. And what has happened is human beings will adjust to the situation. So
how does it do that?
It used to be in the 60s and 70s that if the welfare caseworker came in the house and the male was there, that woman had to be feared. That mother had to fear that her benefits were going to be cut off. Now, so as a result, the male would be out of the house. I can remember going around the house. I was doing work for the Department of Commerce, and I was thought to be a welfare investigator or something. And what would happen is, wait a minute, I'm not ready or whatever. The guy would have to go out the back door because the system didn't encourage two parents in the home. It encouraged the female, the mother, to be there and the male to be out of the home. So we also had a system that encouraged the female to have more children. The more children she had, the more money would come in the house. And that's how a lot of families adjusted. If you have a system that it condones one family living, that's what you'll get. And that's one of the problems that we have in the 60s, and historically, that has been thrust on this present generation. So you have young people today. I think there were some changes made in the 90s where you had girls 15 and 16, if they had a dispute with their parents, they would want to go out and get pregnant because they could get their own apartment. And you can't have a system that condone that. We destroyed the family, especially in the black community, and as your statistics have said, it's spread all over, the white community, whatever. I've always said, whatever bad will happen in the black community, eventually it hits all American society, because this is the way the system is.
It's also sometimes a question of which comes first, the chicken or the egg. I mean, you say that obviously a single woman isn't going to do as well economically as a couple, but oftentimes because of the unemployment among black males, a man who's not working, a man who is not generating income, isn't a financial advantage for a woman. Oftentimes that's a reason that people don't get married. If the man can't support the family, some women might simply decide that they're better off without that marriage certificate.
When we say the 70%, I just want to make sure I never, there's a point you're making. You're saying really the 70% number you think might be inaccurate in that there really is a father at home, but it's not married?
I don't know where the statistics come from.
From the World Almanac.
I don't know how they count the numbers. I don't know what counts as a stable family. I'm simply saying that oftentimes, even though couples aren't married, they are in fact
that happens, and I agree with you.
Well, there's a male. There may be a male image around that house. That's
Does
what
he
I've
live
observed.
in the house?
Yeah, he lives there.
As I gather it, they
but
don't.
There may be a multiple males that come in and out because it's not stable. It's not a stable traditional family. That I can tell you, and I can also give you this insight. There's a big difference on how society treats in, let's say, the urban area where you have, quote, I won't say illegitimate children, I'll say illegitimate parents, as opposed in the Midwest, in Indiana and Ohio and so forth, because I can remember in Ohio, I attended Ohio State, my cousin's husband, when he didn't do child support or whatever, they had what they call the chain gang. And he was made to go work.
Wow.
And that money went to the state. It's not, if they had something like that in New York City, you'd see a different thing. That's what I'm saying. We have a tolerance level for the female. And also, to pick up on one of the points you made, there is a historical precedent for that, because the black female could get employment much easier than the black male. And traditionally, you can trace this through.
Well, let me ask you this, just for clarity's sake. What is the largest factor contributing to the black poverty rate? Is it, well, okay, well, you know what? We're going to take a 15-minute, we're going to take our break. We're at a halfway point. We're going to break for this brief PSA, so stay with us, and we'll be right back. Is that 15 minutes?
When's Daddy coming home? Soon.
Other news, negotiations broke down again.
Daddy, Jared, wait. Come on.
You got me.
So how was work?
Brutal. One meeting after another. I got a ton to do tonight.
At the end of the day, when the weight of the world is upon you,
Daddy doesn't want to play. Hey!
isn't it amazing
All right.
how the weight of their love can lift you up again?
Hey, you guys coming to dinner? Hey, guys.
For a free brochure about rediscovering the joy of your children, call 1-800-A-FAMILY. Focus on the family.
Welcome back. Just to pick up on the point we left off on, what's the larger reason for the poverty rate in the black community? Is it discrimination against blacks, or is it the breakdown of the black family structure?
The largest, hard to answer. I don't know. All those factors are so intertwined and so hard to separate and pull apart that it's hard to know. I do think, though, that the biggest thing in terms of remedying that poverty would be education. It would seem to me that the rewards of education are clear. People with college degrees, people with bachelor's degrees just do phenomenally better economically than people without them. It's a pretty sure path to economic growth.
Well, I was just, and I just wanted to footnote that though. We have a large sea of males, black males that I'm thinking of, and Hispanics as well, that could fill that gap, which I alluded to earlier with the unions. There are a lot of jobs that could be given. Now we have a friction taking place because what's happening is you're having another immigrant population, primarily Latinos from Mexico and South America, that are filling a lot of these jobs that many blacks used to fill. And I'm talking about in the construction industry in the city. And what the issue is, so the Mexicans will work for less money. So you as a employer, you say, hey, look, I'm going to go where I can get the cheapest labor. So that's a problem that's coming on. And again, many males have come up to me. They know that I have, economic development. Says, hey, can you get me a job or whatever? But the guy doing the job, he has somebody from Mexico, Peru, or South America that's doing that work, that can do the work, will do the work. So we have a real problem in these urban areas in particular because the male labor force in the urban areas, one, they don't work as well as this new immigrant population that's motivated to get the job done, and they'll work cheaper. And a lot of and this you see on the higher level as well, because with the international treaties that have been signed, the unions are fighting. We have, I don't know, Chrysler on strike or whatever. They may have settled because they're afraid that jobs from the major employers will be shipped to South America, whatever, where the labor force, they can get the job done for cheaper labor. And so Americans, a lot of blacks I know and talk to, they're not going to work for $8, $5, $6, $7 an hour, where a lot of Mexicans will.
Well, and Bill's right. The reality is that the divide between a professional level job, the income you make on a professional level job, and what you can make in a job where you don't have that kind of education or background is just growing by leaps and bounds. I mean, when I was growing up, I grew up in the Midwest, in Michigan, auto country. As a high school graduate, you could get a job in an auto factory. You could make for the equivalent now of $50,000, $60,000 a year. Wow. You could buy. My dad did it. He bought a home, raised a family, sent us all to college, had a car. He did very well, and he established a niche in middle class life. You can't do that these days without some kind of education, some kind of skill, because we've turned into a service economy. And service jobs don't pay what manufacturing jobs pay. Now, I'm not suggesting we can somehow reverse that trend. It's a globalized trend. It's hard to resist. But that's a reality. That's a fact of life for a lot of people trying to get that first niche.
Why is it in particular in the black community that the percentage of families is so high without a father at home? What is it in the black community or in the black
I think I like addressing this, the social policies we have in place. We could very easily...
So you think government had a lot
Well,
to do with
government
it?
certainly has a role, and of course education, but the government could very easily on the local, state, and federal level say, look, okay, for example, let's deal with a practical issue. Rents are very high in New York City. Okay, if you have the father of your children or whatever, I mean, they've curtailed it now. Okay, you don't have to be married, but you could be domestic partners. You could file that certificate, whatever. Some kind of legal recognition that you will stay in home, because we do know it's better for the children if you have the father and mother in the home. We will give you a supplement to help you meet your expenses if you don't have the economic prowess to meet it on your own. You don't have the educational skills or the jobs. Government doesn't do that.
You know, as you suggested, it's a trend that goes beyond the black community, though, into American culture. I mean, we have celebrities who have children out of wedlock all the time. It's not necessarily looked down upon. It's just gossip.
It's a tolerance, right? It's a tolerance.
The gossip pages are there, and also we went through in this country a time of women's liberation, a wonderful thing, necessary thing, and there's still progress that needs to be made. But along the way, there were some misconceptions. There was a sense among some women that they didn't need men. They didn't need a father in a home. I think they were wrong. I think the society has come to see that was not necessarily true. But maybe if you have enough money, if you're a celebrity and you make millions a year, you can pull that trick off. It's very much tougher further lower down on the economics.
Absolutely.
One of the best black spokesmen in the country, in my opinion, Bill Cosby, is addressing this, and he's talking about the importance of having a father. I mean, the white rate of illegitimacy, I'm using that term, children born without, some people get offended by it. It's just a quick way to say it, but children born without a father. The white rate of children born no father at home in the 50s was 4%. It is now 25%. That's up 500% in the white community. In the black community, it's up from 25% to 70%. The Hispanic rate is 50%. It's a major, major problem. Now, in my judgment, neither of you said this. I think it's due to the culture. What we're seeing on TV, what the kids turn on TV, what they see on cable, what's going on, the message conveyed. And I'm just wondering, do you agree that the culture in our society has to some extent contributed to this enormous rise in all the communities, but to the devastating rate of 70% in the black community? Do you think that's contributing to the problem? And if so, what do you think could be done about it? If you think it's part of the contributing factors.
Well, you know, for a long time in our society, women were trapped in marriages. They had limited opportunities. They couldn't go out and earn a very good living. The traditional model was the woman stayed home, the man went out and earned money. Because of that, I think you had a lot of very, very unhappy marriages that stayed together for a very long time. Now, you could have an argument over whether that's good or bad
It's
for
not
the children
divorce that's the
involved.
big problem. This is more children born from day one. It's not that they
Well,
get
but
divorced.
But half of the marriages that are made end in divorce. That's part of the problem.
That's
There's
true.
no denying.
But it was always pretty high. The divorce rate, even back in the 60s, was about 25%. The rate that's gone up the most is the children born from day one. The parents were never married. There's sex, premarital sex. It's galore. That's happening all over the place.
Like I said, society has changed its philosophy and tolerates that. And by that, I'm talking about our courts. I'm talking about our schools. We had this conversation prior where now you have your children from first grade, even in kindergarten, where they're giving them these new models of the family. It's no longer the traditional model of the father and the mother. And like you alluded to, I was raised in a home where my mother stayed home, my father worked. No, it could be two women in the home, could be two males in the homes. We don't have our value. Society's changed its value system completely in this country, and we're getting the offshoots where, for example, in the black community, the last statistics, there were more black males under 25 in prison than in universities.
Colleges, I've heard.
I mean, this is horrendous. This is horrendous. Now, why do we tolerate this? What can be done about it? Again, I said the government. We have to, as a people, have to say, look, we don't want to go this direction, and we're going to make our institutions be responsible. If you're involved with the court system and you see in family court what's happening and see some of these decisions that these judges make, then you would understand why we have this situation.
But what about the
we have.
culture itself? I mean, out of 10,000 sex acts shown on TV implicitly, 90% of it takes place outside of marriage. And it's been getting worse. It wasn't like this in the 50s. They never did that.
Well, does the TV contribute to it? Yes, absolutely.
The culture. Do you think that it's playing? I mean, why? That 7 out of 10 black babies born, those poor kids from day one, don't have the character building factors needed from the father. You both had fathers at home.
Right.
Look how you guys turned out. It's important.
Yeah, we know it. We know. We don't
But
have
it's
to
not being
reinvent the
addressed. I don't
wheel.
see that, other than Bill Cosby. I don't see people are talking about it. And
People are talking about it.
Are they talking
Believe
about
me.
it?
It's a discussion that's been going on.
Right, you have the Promise
I-
for a
Keepers,
long
you have
time.
many organizations.
That's
We
good to
know,
hear. That
we
is good to
know.
hear.
But the point is, again, you have to look at the money where you can't, that poor child, they can't
I
take
know.
care of that problem until they get up a certain stage. It's
heartbreaking.
They're subject to whatever the adults do to them, and society does to them.
Who were the spokesmen in the black community besides Bill Cosby addressing it? You say they are, but I don't.
I
I'm
wasn't aware
not
of
talking
it.
about spokesmen. I'm talking about ordinary black people who sit
Oh, I
around over
see.
dinner on holidays
So they
with
know it.
family
They
or,
see
or
this.
friends or over social events. The subject comes up, we talk about it.
So how
Everybody
how-
grappling
and what do they
for
think is
solutions.
causing this rate of premarital sex that's phenomenal? That's 7 out of 10 kids born. Do they think it's the filth on TV and in the cable? I mean, I don't know. What do they think is causing it?
Premarital sex is a powerful urge. I mean, you're not going to stop premarital sex.
We didn't have this in the 50s when they didn't even have all these
And
contraceptives.
it was a time when people got married an awful lot sooner. If you get married at 18, it's one thing. If you get married at 30, you're not going to wait until you're 30 to have sex.
Yeah, but again, like I said, we have a tolerance level now which our generation is responsible for the 60s, like you mentioned, the women's lib and so forth, that you didn't openly have in the, let's say, the early 1900s. There was a lot of premarital sex going on, but it wasn't as exposed as it is now. The urge has always been there. I don't think human beings have changed anymore. It's just now it's more tolerated and accepted. Because I can remember in churches when I was growing up, if a girl got pregnant, it was always a female. If she got pregnant out of wedlock, she was ostracized from the church. Now she's welcomed. You know, and again, you can't blame that child.
But that's
although
what I mean.
I have to wonder if ostracizing a child in need from religious teachings is a good thing.
Not going to help, no.
Yeah, well, that's what I said. Now it's
Not gonna
welcome,
help.
but before, the female was always the victim,
But
and the male
rates
was
of
off.
the rates of premarital sex were not nearly what they are today. I'm not sure if you guys are disputing that. That's well established, and they didn't even have all these mechanisms to prevent conception. Now they do. In spite of that, you're seeing 1 out of every 3 American babies born last year, no father at home. 1 out of every 3. It was 4% and 5% in the 50s and 60s. It's up 8-fold.
You know, I suspect in some ways it's generational too. If you grow up in a family where there was only one parent, that's the model that you see. You see that as a
agree with that
viable
also.
option, as something you can do, and it'll be okay.
Is there something you'd recommend? How can we address the problem of the high rate of children born with no father in black men, and in the whole society, really? What
Well,
what can
again,
be
I
done?
told you, government has to encourage, and they could do this. It's financial incentives. Bush has touched on this.
What you're saying? Eliminate the penalties for getting married if you have a child.
Well, they
But
tried
that's
to do
already
it in
if
the
they're
tax
already
code.
under the poverty
no, but
level.
I'm saying, give the incentives
Give
for
me a
having.
specific. What specifically? Because
Well-
I don't see the incentives anymore. Because that means
Well,
the couple
one very simple, with your Section 8 rent subsidy program. Instead of the male having to be in a home, you have to have that male in the home. That would change many things because, hey, I know in the inner city, guys got to have a place to stay. He's not going to be there if
so now they can't be in the home.
No, they can't be in the home.
That should be changed, I guess.
30 seconds. Why don't you give us your best recommendation?
I
for-
think it happens on the ground level. I think that families have to talk about this. I think that families have to talk to their kids about the value of marriage and the value of dual parent families and delaying childbirth. All of those things have to come up as a part of your value system and your outlook on life. Now, I agree with Bill that there are a lot of things that the government does that they could do differently, but I think fundamentally it's a much more personal matter.
Okay. I'd like to thank our guests tonight, Alvin Besant and Bill Andrews. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. You've been watching American Family Association Presents. Please join us next time for another enlightening discussion. Thank you.